The coffee was still hot when the violation notice appeared under my windshield wiper, like a parking ticket from a parallel universe where the DMV had a HOA subdivision and absolutely nothing better to do. I stood in my driveway in yesterday's flannel shirt, holding a bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios, reading it in the particular way you read something that cannot possibly say what it says. Then I read it again. Then I looked up at my mailbox, the old cedar post mailbox my father had built in 1987, the one with the little carved rooster on the cap that he'd done with a pocket knife on a Tuesday afternoon. And I looked back at the notice. Non-compliant mailbox structure. Aesthetic inconsistency with community standards. Fine. $75. Remedy required within 14 days. I ate a spoonful of cereal. The rooster stared at me. Same, I told it. I'm going to. I'd moved to Sycamore Glen Estates 11 months ago, which was long enough to know that the neighborhood had good drainage and terrible politics, and short enough that I'd still been operating under the optimistic delusion that the HOA was mostly theoretical. A document you signed. Background noise. The homeowner's equivalent of those terms and conditions nobody reads. I had read them, actually. I'm a civil engineer. Reading dense regulatory language is essentially my hobby, which my last girlfriend described as a personality trait that explains a lot. I had read the CC and Rs, the bylaws, the architectural guidelines, and the 2019 amendment that specified acceptable mulch colors. Brown, dark brown. Or, in a bold creative departure, natural. The mailbox section said structures must be maintained in good repair and consistent with neighborhood aesthetic. My mailbox was in perfect repair. My father had built it from cedar, and it had outlasted 2 marriages, 1 recession, and a direct hit from a UPS truck that the driver had described in his incident report as, "The mailbox came out of nowhere," which was not technically accurate, but which I respected as a narrative choice. I called the HOA's complaint line. A recorded message told me my call was important, and then played 17 seconds of what I can only describe as music designed by a committee that had never heard music. I left a polite message explaining that the mailbox was structurally sound and historically significant, at least to me personally, and asked for clarification on which specific aesthetic standard it violated. 3 days later, I received a second notice. This one added a $25 administrative processing fee for the first notice, which I'm fairly certain was not in the CC and Rs, but which was written on official letterhead with a gold-embossed logo of a house inside a circle, as though the house were being monitored, which, in retrospect, it was. That was a Thursday. On Friday morning, I met Brenda. She materialized at the end of my driveway at 8:04 a.m., with the quiet inevitability of a weather system that had been building pressure for 30 years and had finally found a suitable landfall. She was a woman of perhaps 55, wearing pressed khaki slacks with a crease you could have used to open mail, a polo shirt in a shade of mauve that suggested she'd specifically requested the color be called something other than pink, and orthopedic walking shoes in blinding white that had never, not once, been near a lawn. Her hair was set in a style that stopped moving sometime around 1994, and had apparently made peace with that. She carried a clipboard, not holding it loosely, not tucked under her arm, but gripped at chest height with both hands like a priest holding scripture, and attached to the clipboard was a pen on a retractable cord, which struck me as either deeply organized or deeply unwell. "You're Logan Mercer," she said. Not a question. The verbal tick arrived immediately, before hello, before a name, before any of the social preamble that humans had agreed on centuries ago. Per our records. Per our records. That was the phrase. Tinkorm itsiran. She deployed it the way other people deployed eye contact, as establishment of dominance, proof of preparation, a reminder that she had a clipboard and you did not. "I am," I said. "Brenda Kowalski, HOA president." She looked at the mailbox the way a building inspector looks at a condemned property. "You received our notices." I did. I also left a voicemail asking for, "Per our records," she said. "The structure does not meet Section 4, paragraph 2 of the architectural guidelines, which specify that mailbox posts must be painted or stained in one of the approved colors, which are listed in Appendix C. My mailbox is cedar, natural cedar, which is listed in the mulch guidelines as an approved natural color. She blinked once. The kind of blink that means the person heard you and has decided to continue anyway. Appendix C covers mailbox posts specifically. What color is my post in your assessment? It's weathered. Cedar weathers to a silver gray, which is a natural color. It's not on the approved list. I looked at my Cheerios, which had begun to get soggy, which felt appropriate. Can I see Appendix C? She unclipped something from the back of the clipboard and handed me a laminated sheet. Appendix C listed 8 approved colors. They were colonial white, antique white, creamy white, Dover white, natural linen, sandstone, warm beige, and classic tan. They were, functionally, all the same color. These are all white, I said. They are all approved, she said, and the distinction in her voice was the distinction between a fact and a commandment. I tried the reasonable approach. Because I am a reasonable man, and also because I wanted the paper trail. I submitted a formal variance request, 3 pages properly formatted, with photographs of the mailbox, documentation of the cedar construction, a brief historical note about my father, and a citation from the National Association of Home Builders indicating that naturally weathered cedar was an accepted exterior finish material. I hand-delivered it to Brenda's house, which was identifiable from the street by its absolute aggressive perfection. The mulch was dark brown and level to the millimeter. The flower beds had plants that were spaced with what I can only assume was a ruler, and there was a small decorative sign near the front walk that read "The Kowalskis," in a font that meant business. I knocked. She opened the door before I finished knocking. Thought, which meant she'd been watching. "Variance request," I said, and handed her the envelope. She took it, looked at the envelope, looked at me, and said, "Per our records, variance requests must be submitted to the Architectural Committee, not to me personally." "You are the Architectural Committee," I said. "Per your website." A pause. "I chair the Architectural Committee." "Right, so. Meetings are the 3rd Tuesday of the month." She looked at the envelope again. "The next one is in 19 days. She closed the door. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the neighborhood. A sprinkler ran somewhere. A bird made a decision. The door did not reopen. I drove home, cracked a beer. It was 10:45 a.m., and I considered the circumstances and decided they were extenuating. And sat at my kitchen table with the CC and Rs, the bylaws. The architectural guidelines, Appendix C, and a fresh legal pad. The Architectural Committee meeting was held in Brenda's living room, which looked exactly like you'd expect if you'd seen her clipboard. Everything in cream and beige, a couch that appeared to have never been sat on, and a centerpiece on the coffee table that was 3 decorative balls in a bowl, which is a choice that tells you everything about a person, and none of it good. There were 4 committee members, 3 of whom looked at me with mild sympathy, and 1 of whom appeared to be asleep. I presented my case calmly and with documentation. Brenda denied the variance in 4 minutes, her stated reason. The cedar post sets an inconsistent visual precedent for the neighborhood streetscape. Then she said the thing she didn't mean to say. I was gathering my papers. And she was talking to the woman next to her, the one with the sympathy look, in a voice just low enough that I was probably not supposed to hear it clearly. "The Hendersons redid their whole mailbox setup 2 years ago," she said. "Brand new post, copper finial, the works, gorgeous, and nobody's even noticed." A pause. "He just moved in 11 months ago, and now everyone on Maple Run is looking at that." I stopped organizing my papers. I didn't look up, I just got quieter. I drove home. I ate a sandwich. Specifically, I ate a turkey sandwich on sourdough and stared at the wall above my kitchen sink for approximately 6 minutes, which is how I process things that have rearranged themselves into a different shape than they appeared. This was not about the mailbox. It was never about the mailbox. It was about the fact that someone new had moved onto Maple Run Drive, and his driveway was slightly longer than the regulation curve, and his mailbox was interesting, and people had looked at it, and Brenda Kowalski had spent 30 years being the most interesting thing on this street, and did not intend to cede that position to a man with a bowl of cereal and a dead father's woodworking. I finished the sandwich. I opened my laptop. Here is something nobody tells you about civil engineering as a profession. We do a lot of work in jurisdictions where the rules about what you can build and where are written in approximately 47 different overlapping documents that frequently contradict each other. And the people who understand those contradictions are almost always the people who built something that shouldn't exist and have the certificate of occupancy to prove it. I pulled up the Sycamore Glen County Planning Code, the HOA CC&Rs, the State Residential Building Code, and a very specific subsection of the county zoning ordinance that I had noticed 3 weeks ago while doing something else entirely, and had filed away in the part of my brain that is apparently always watching. I found what I was looking for at 11:37 p.m. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon, which felt more appropriate than beer for the occasion. The CC&Rs had extensive language about fences, extensive language about sheds, detailed provisions about pools, decks, pergolas, and, in a remarkable act of specificity, bird baths above a certain diameter. They had 8 approved colors for mailbox posts. They had nothing about lighthouses, not a word, not a height restriction, not an aesthetic provision, not a footnote. I cross-checked the county zoning ordinance. Residential zones permitted ornamental structures up to 15 feet without a variance, provided they did not block sightlines at the roadway and did not contain habitable space. A lighthouse, technically, contains no habitable space. It is ornamental. It emits light, which several sections of the county code actually required of structures near roadways for safety compliance purposes. I sat back and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then I called my buddy, Ray. Ray Castellano had been doing concrete and masonry work for 22 years, which had given him forearms like bridge cable and an opinion of building codes that could be summarized as more of a guideline situation. He drove a truck with a crack in the windshield he'd been meaning to fix since 2019, kept a toothpick behind his ear at all times as a kind of architectural ornament, and wore the same Carhartt jacket in all weather on the theory that if you dressed for the worst, the weather had nothing on you. I'd met him when I hired him to redo my front walk. I called him at 11:52 p.m., which he answered on the second ring without any indication that this was an unusual time for a phone call. Ray. Logan. What'd they do? Not a question. Ray had met Brenda once, at the property line while he was pouring my walkway, and she had told him, per her records. The contractor vehicles were required to park on the street, and not partially in the driveway, and Ray had looked at her for a long moment with the toothpick moving slowly from one side of his mouth to the other, and said, "Ma'am, I've built things that outlasted the people who tried to stop them," and then turned back to his concrete. And I had decided at that moment that Ray was the finest American I had personally encountered. "I need to build a lighthouse around my mailbox," I said. A pause. The toothpick moved. I could tell somehow, even over the phone. "How big?" he said. 15 feet, octagonal base, full working light at the top. I'm thinking a Fresnel-style LED array. Needs to be structurally sound, properly footed, and finished in white with a red cap." Another pause. Then, "Does she know yet?" "She does not. I want to be there when she finds out." "Ray, you're going to build it. You'll be there when she finds out by default." "Yeah," he said, "but I want a chair." I pulled the permits myself, which is something civilians don't know you can do, and which takes about 4 business days and costs less than Brenda's 3rd violation notice. The permit for an ornamental structure, residential zone, under 15 feet, came back approved on a Wednesday. I held it the way you hold a thing you're going to need later, and filed it in a folder labeled, with perhaps excessive satisfaction, documentation. I ordered the materials: concrete footings, pressure-treated lumber for the frame, fiber cement panels for the exterior, a copper-capped cupola for the top, and a commercial-grade LED beacon light that rotated at 3 RPM and was, per the manufacturer's specification, visible from approximately 1 mile on a clear night. I also ordered a small bronze plaque, which I had engraved at a trophy shop downtown. The woman behind the counter read what I'd written, looked up at me and said, "Is this for a real lighthouse?" "Sort of," I said. She looked back down at it. "Can I ask why?" "HOA." She nodded slowly, with the expression of someone who had heard this word and understood it as a diagnosis. "I'll do the rush order," she said. "No charge for the rush." We broke ground on a Saturday. Ray showed up at 7 a.m. with 2 guys named Dimitri and a truck full of materials organized in a way that suggested either military training or a very specific kind of anxiety. He was wearing the Carhartt jacket, a neon. The toothpick was in place. "We doing this right?" he said. It was not a question. "We're doing this so right it's going to have a historical marker on it by 2040, I said. By noon we had the footings poured. By Saturday evening we had the frame up. By Sunday afternoon, the fiber cement exterior was on, and the whole thing stood 15 feet tall at the peak, white as a fresh violation notice, with a red-painted cupola and 8 small windows at the beacon level and my father's mailbox. Unmodified, cedar, rooster intact, embedded into the base at exactly regulation height. I installed the light Sunday evening. I aimed it carefully. At 3 RPM, the beam swept across the front of the neighborhood with the slow, patient authority of something that has been here longer than you and intends to remain. I attached the bronze plaque to the base. It read, "Maple Run Lighthouse, Est, 2024. In honor of Robert Mercer, who built the mailbox structure compliant with all applicable county ordinances, permit hash 2024 ORN 0847. I stood back and looked at it in the dark. Ray stood next to me with a beer, the beacon light sweeping slowly across his face every 20 seconds. "Logan," he said. "Yeah. That's the most beautiful act of bureaucratic warfare I have ever personally witnessed." I cracked my own beer. "She hasn't seen it yet." "No," he said, and he was smiling in the way of a man watching something inevitable arrive on schedule. "But she's going to." She saw it Monday morning. I know because I was drinking coffee at my kitchen window, which has a clear sight line to the end of my driveway. And I watched Brenda Kowalski begin her morning patrol at 7:30 a.m. with her clipboard and her white shoes, walking the neighborhood in the specific manner of a general inspecting troops, and I watched the moment the lighthouse entered her field of vision. She stopped. She stood completely still for what I timed at 11 seconds, which is a very long time to stand completely still while holding a clipboard. Then she walked closer. She stood at the property line, not crossing it, I noted, because Brenda understood lines. She just drew them, and looked up at the lighthouse the way a person looks at something that should not exist, but clearly does. The beacon swept past. It illuminated her face in a slow, calm arc. She wrote something on her clipboard. She walked away. 3 hours later, I received a notice via email. They'd upgraded to email, which felt like an escalation of modernity, informing me that I had erected a structure that violated community aesthetic standards and required immediate removal. I forwarded this email to myself with the subject line, "Getting warmer, Brenda." Then I sent a reply with a scanned copy of permit hash 2024 ORN 0847 and a brief note. Per our records, the structure is a compliant ornamental installation under County Ordinance Section March 2nd, 14. Please reference the attached permit. The CC and Rs contain no height or aesthetic restrictions applicable to ornamental structures. I am happy to discuss this further at the next Architectural Committee meeting, which, per your scheduling, is the 3rd Tuesday of the month. I reread that last line 3 times. Then I sent it. What followed was, professionally speaking, an impressive display of escalation. Brenda filed a complaint with the County Planning Department, who called me, reviewed the permit, and told her the structure was compliant. She filed a second complaint alleging the beacon light constituted light pollution under a noise and nuisance ordinance that also covered sound, which I found philosophically interesting. The county responded that residential ornamental lighting was specifically exempt from that ordinance, provided it didn't exceed certain lumens. I had, somewhat deliberately, selected a beacon that came in just under the threshold. Then she tried to call an emergency HOA board meeting to pass a new rule specifically restricting lighthouse construction, which is a sentence I wrote in my notes and then reread several times just to confirm it was real. The board met. 3 members. Brenda, a retired postal worker named Gerald, who wore cargo shorts regardless of weather, and had, on 2 prior occasions, told Brenda to her face that she was being unreasonable, and a woman named Patty, who taught 3rd grade and had the specific energy of someone who spent 8 hours a day managing small people in conflict and had opinions about how adults should behave. I was not in the room, but Ray had started doing a small repointing job on my front walk foundation, which coincidentally put him in audio range of Brenda's open side window, and reported back that the meeting lasted 45 minutes. That Gerald said, "Brenda, it's a lighthouse, not a crime scene," at least twice, and that Patty at one point said, "We cannot pass a rule banning lighthouses, Brenda. That's not, no," with the exact cadence of someone explaining to a 3rd grader why you cannot make a rule that only applies to one person. The emergency meeting resulted in no new rule. Brenda took this quietly, which I had learned by now meant she was not done. The next thing she did, I will give her credit, was creative. She hired a private property surveyor, apparently on her own budget, to survey my lot lines on the theory that the lighthouse might be technically over the property line by some fraction of an inch, which would constitute an encroachment. The surveyor showed up on a Tuesday with equipment and the specific expression of a professional who has been paid to prove something that he has already concluded he cannot prove. He spent 2 hours working. He found that the lighthouse was 4 inches inside my property line. I know because he told me directly, in the driveway, with Brenda standing 15 feet away. He said, "Structure is clearly within your lot, Mr. Mercer." And then he looked at Brenda and said, "Ma'am, my invoice will be emailed to you," and drove away with the quiet dignity of a man who bills by the hour and does not get involved. Brenda stood in front of the lighthouse for a long moment. The beacon swept past her. She looked up at the rooster on my father's mailbox, visible through the glass panel I'd installed in the base of the structure specifically, so the original mailbox remained visible from the street. "That rooster," she said to nobody in particular, "has been staring at me for 11 months. It was not intended for me. Duh. She was perhaps 6 feet away, and her voice had dropped to a register that meant the words were addressed to herself, or to some internal committee she convened when external ones failed her. I was checking the mounting hardware on the plaque. I did not react. I did not look up. I just noted it. The neighborhood, for its part, had been paying attention. My neighbor across the street, a retired electrician named Frank, who was 71 years old and wore a fishing hat indoors and out, had taken to walking his dog past the lighthouse twice daily, at times that coincided with peak Brenda patrol hours. He didn't say much. He had a fold-up camp chair that he'd begun leaving on his porch, and on the Saturday morning when the surveyor was working, Frank had been sitting in it with a thermos of coffee, watching with the relaxed attention of a man attending a sporting event in which he has no personal stake, but strong aesthetic preferences. When the surveyor delivered his verdict, Frank raised his thermos. Not in a toast exactly, more in the way of a man acknowledging that the math had worked out correctly, as he had expected. I nodded at him. He drank his coffee. I was inside eating lunch, leftover pasta, eaten standing at the counter because I had not yet decided where I wanted to sit, when Ray called. "She's out there," he said. "Brenda? With a Logan, I think she's got a measuring tape and a camera and what looks like a mason jar full of something." I put down the pasta. "What's in the jar?" "I don't know," he said. "It's got a label." I looked out my front window. Brenda was standing at the base of the lighthouse with a yellow measuring tape extended and a camera around her neck and a mason jar that, as I watched, she opened and dipped her finger into and pressed against the fiber cement panel on the exterior. "She's testing the finish," I said, with the flat wonder of a man narrating a nature documentary. Can she do that?" She's on the public easement at the edge of my property, I said. Technically, she's not on my land. Technically, I cannot stop her from whatever she's doing. What is she doing? I believe, I said slowly, that she is attempting to determine whether the exterior finish meets a paint specification that does not exist in any document that currently governs my property. A pause. Logan, Ray said. She's lost the thread. She really has. You want me to come over? Not yet, I said. Let her finish. She took 4 photographs, made 3 notations on her clipboard, and left with the mason jar. 3 days later, I received a notice, the 7th, by my count, which I had started tracking on a legal pad with the date, the alleged violation, and a brief editorial note, stating that the Lighthouse exterior finish did not conform to the approved color palette in Appendix C: colonial white, antique white, creamy white, Dover white, natural linen, sandstone, warm beige, classic tan. I had painted the Lighthouse white, standard exterior white. I looked at the notice for a long time. Then I drove to the paint store, bought a quart of colonial white, specifically Sherwin-Williams colonial white, SW 7136, Tupper white, which is on the Appendix C list I knew by memory at this point, and retouched 3 square inches of the exterior that I could plausibly argue had been the wrong shade. I photographed the process. I photographed the paint can label. I photographed the finished result. I sent Brenda an email at 9:17 p.m. on a Wednesday with the subject line, Appendix C, Compliance Update, and attached all 11 photographs with brief captions, the last of which read, Exterior finish, now confirmed colonial white, SW, 7136, per Appendix C. Please advise if additional documentation is required. Per our records, this addresses the outstanding notice. That last part I am not ashamed of. There was a week of silence, which I did not trust. The lighthouse stood. The beacon turned. Mail arrived, was deposited, was retrieved. Frank walked his dog. The neighborhood went about its business with the lighthouse as the new fixture of the streetscape, the way a neighborhood adapts to anything that has been there long enough to develop a permit. 3 people had stopped to take photographs of it. A woman had asked me if it was a real lighthouse. I had told her it was a real lighthouse that received mail, which she found either charming or deeply strange, and I was fine with either. On a Thursday afternoon, I came home from work to find a notice from the HOA's attorney. It was 2 pages. It alleged that the lighthouse constituted a commercial structure by virtue of containing a rotating navigational beacon, which was a use reserved for maritime and commercial facilities under an interpretation of the zoning code that was so creative, I genuinely respected the legal imagination behind it, even as I recognized it as a complete fabrication. I called my own attorney, who is a man named Doug, who charges $300 an hour, and whose primary personality trait is finding bad legal arguments offensive in the way other people find bad art offensive. I read Doug the letter over the phone. There was a pause. Logan, Doug said. Yeah. A residential LED decorative beacon is not a commercial navigational structure. I know. This is, he paused, searching for the correct term, not a serious legal position. I know. Do you want me to write them a letter, or do you want to wait and see what happens at the annual HOA meeting next month? I thought about this. When's the annual meeting? When is it? The annual HOA meeting. When is it? I checked my calendar. 3 weeks. Then let's wait, Doug said. Draft the response, but hold it. If she's filing legal theories about maritime law in a landlocked suburb, she's building toward something. Let her build. He billed me for 45 minutes, which was fair. The annual HOA meeting was held at the Sycamore Glen Community Clubhouse, which was a beige room with folding chairs and a projector screen that had a slight lean to the left, and a coffee urn that had been making the same coffee since 2011. 43 homeowners attended, which was a record, and several of them had clearly come specifically because they had heard about the lighthouse, a fact I deduced from the way several people found my chair and sat near it with the energy of people who have purchased tickets to something. Brenda called the meeting to order. She was wearing pressed navy slacks and a white blouse and had her clipboard, and she presented the annual financial report and the landscaping maintenance schedule with the precision of someone who is prepared for this meeting and a separate meeting that she has not yet announced. And the whole room could feel both meetings happening simultaneously. Gerald, the retired postal worker, was in the second row in cargo shorts and a polo shirt, and had the expression of a man who had attended many of these meetings and had opinions about all of them. Patty, the third-grade teacher, was in the corner with a water bottle, and the expression of a woman who was present but was reserving judgment. I was in the fourth row with a manila folder on my knee. The financial report concluded. The landscaping discussion concluded. There was a brief debate about whether the community holiday lights budget should be increased, which Gerald resolved by saying, "Sure, fine, yes, spend the money," with such comprehensive disinterest that it passed unanimously. Then Brenda cleared her throat. "I need to raise the matter of the ornamental structure recently erected at 14 Maple Run Drive," she said, and the room went very still in the way rooms go still when a thing has been anticipated. She clicked a button on the projector remote. A slide appeared. It was a photograph of the lighthouse. It was, if I'm being objective, a striking photograph. The lighthouse caught the evening light with some architectural dignity, the beacon visible even in daylight, the lighthouse white and clean against the sky, Sopon and my father's mailbox visible through the base panel with the rooster doing what the rooster had always done. Several people murmured, not negatively. "This structure," Brenda said, "represents a fundamental challenge to the visual coherence of our community. It is 15 feet tall. It has a rotating light. It contains," she advanced the slide, "a mailbox." This last word was delivered with a gravity that suggested it should have been followed by legal consequences. Frank, who had apparently also attended the annual meeting, was in the back row. He had not brought the camp chair, but his posture suggested he had considered it. "Per our records," Brenda continued, and I watched 3 people in the audience mouth the words along with her, which told me this was not the first time they had noticed the phrase. "The structure creates an inconsistent visual precedent. I am proposing that the board adopt a resolution requiring its removal and establishing height restrictions for all future ornamental structures." She advanced to the final slide. The final slide was a proposed amendment to the CC and Rs limiting ornamental structures to 4 feet. I opened my manila folder. Gerald raised his hand. "Brenda, can I ask something?" "Gerald? Does the man have a permit?" A pause. "The county permit process doesn't override HOA." "Does he have a permit?" Gerald said again, with the patience of a man who will repeat this question indefinitely. "He has a county permit, but—" "Okay," Gerald said, and leaned back in his chair in a way that concluded his participation in this particular line of questioning. "I'd like to speak," I said. Brenda looked at me. "This is a board matter." "It's an open meeting," Patty said from the corner, still with the water bottle. "He's a member. He can speak." I stood up. I took out the permit. I took out the CC and Rs with the relevant sections tabbed. I took out the county zoning ordinance with section March 2nd, 14 highlighted. I took out Doug's letter, which I had brought but not yet sent, and I placed it on the table in front of me and left it face down. "I have county permit 2024 Orn 0847 for the structure," I said. "The structure is within my property lines, confirmed by survey. The current CC and Rs contain no provision restricting ornamental structures by height or aesthetic type. The lighthouse complies with Appendix C color requirements and is finished in colonial white, SW 7136. I let that land. "The proposed amendment," I continued, "would require a 2/3 majority vote of all homeowners, not just the board, per Article 12, Section 3 of the bylaws. There are 78 households in Sycamore Glen. You would need 52 votes." I looked at the room. There were 43 people here, which meant even if everyone in this room voted for the amendment, she was still 9 votes short of the attending membership, let alone the total required. Brenda knew this. I watched her know it. "Furthermore," I said, I've retained counsel, who has reviewed the HOA's attorney's letter alleging commercial use. That letter will receive a formal response tomorrow morning. I placed my hand on Doug's face-down letter, without flipping it over. I'd prefer to resolve this within the community. But per our records, and I watched Brenda's jaw tighten at those 3 words coming back at her, I am fully within my rights and fully prepared to defend them. I sat down. Gerald made a sound that was technically a cough. It was not a cough. Brenda tabled the proposed amendment for further community input. The meeting moved to other business, but Brenda was not finished, because Brenda was constitutionally incapable of being finished, and she had made the mistake that people with clipboards frequently make, which is confusing the map for the territory, and the rule for the reason, and the enforcement for the thing being enforced. On a Saturday morning 2 weeks later, she appeared at the front of my driveway, and she was not alone. She had a man with her. Warauba. He wore a jacket with a company logo I didn't recognize, and carried his own clipboard, which meant Brenda had found the one configuration more dangerous than herself. Herself plus a contractor. "I've hired a paint inspector," she said, "to conduct a formal color analysis of your structure." I was drinking coffee on my porch. I lowered the mug. "A paint inspector," I said, "to verify the Appendix C compliance." I looked at the paint inspector, who had the expression of a man who had agreed to this job before fully understanding what the job was and was now in it. "The paint is Colonial White, SW 7136, I said. "I have the receipt. A visual inspection will confirm." "Brenda." Ray's voice came from the side yard, where he had been doing absolutely nothing in particular, except apparently being present. "Sonora," which was either coincidence or Ray's version of the camp chair. He was leaning against the fence post with the toothpick in place. "You hired a paint inspector?" "This is HOA business." "For a permit-approved structure painted a color that the man has a receipt for," Ray said. "You hired a paint inspector." The paint inspector looked at Ray. Ray looked at the paint inspector with the expression of one tradesman assessing another's professional dignity. "You drove here," Ray said to him, "with a spectrometer to tell a man his white house is white." The paint inspector, to his considerable credit, said nothing. But something moved behind his eyes. "I'm conducting an inspection," Brenda said. "Okay," I said. I put down my coffee and walked to the lighthouse and stood next to it with my arms folded. "Assam? Inspect." The paint inspector set up his equipment. He ran his spectrometer over 3 points on the exterior. He checked the readings. He checked them again. He wrote something on his clipboard. He turned to Brenda. "It's Colonial White," he said. A silence. "Are you certain?" "Ma'am, I've been doing color analysis for 16 years. He held up his clipboard. "It's Colonial White." He paused. "SW 7136. He packed up his equipment. He looked at the lighthouse for a moment, and I watched him do the involuntary thing that people did when they looked at it, which was recalibrate slightly, the way you do when something is more solid and considered than you expected. "Nice lighthouse," he said, and walked back to his truck. Brenda stood at the base of the lighthouse. The beacon swept past. Her clipboard was at her side. And then Brenda Kowalski, HOA President, Chair of the Architectural Committee, Keeper of Appendix C and its 8 shades of white, did the thing that I had not predicted but perhaps should have. She lost it. Not immediately. There was a moment of silence that felt like the second before a summer storm. The specific pressure drop quiet that means the atmosphere has made a decision. Then she slammed her clipboard against the base of the lighthouse. It connected with a sound like a gunshot in the still morning air and bounced off the fiber cement and landed in my mulch, dark brown for the record, fully compliant, and the pen on its retractable cord swung wildly and smacked her on the wrist. "This," she said. The word came out at a volume I had not previously heard from Brenda and did not know she contained. "This structure, Brenda," I started, "is a lighthouse." She pointed at it. Her hand was shaking. "In a neighborhood. It's a lighthouse in a neighborhood, and nobody sees that this is insane." Frank appeared on his porch across the street. He was holding his thermos. He did not get the camp chair because there was no time for the camp chair, but he gripped the porch railing with the posture of a man who is going to watch this and remember it. Patty, who lived 3 houses down and had apparently been gardening, was visible over her hedgerow. She had garden shears in one hand and had stopped moving entirely. "The county approved it," Brenda's voice cracked on approved, a hairline fracture of real feeling coming through the enforcement language. "Because you filed a permit. Because you sat in my committee meeting with your documentation and your tab dividers." Her voice went up on tab dividers in a way that made absolutely clear that the tab dividers had bothered her enormously, and she had been holding that in for some time. "And now there is a 15-foot lighthouse on Maple Run Drive because you were angry about a mailbox." "It's a very good mailbox," I said, with a calm that I felt the situation required. "It has a rooster on it." "My father carved that rooster," I said, still calm, still flat, and something in my voice must have registered because Brenda stopped and looked at me and breathed hard and looked at the rooster through the glass panel and then looked away. "You don't—" She stopped. Started again. Her voice was different now, thinned out, something real and unflatteringly human in it. "You don't understand what it takes to keep a neighborhood like this." "Looking like all the other neighborhoods," I said. She looked at me. "I understand what you're trying to do," I said. "I understand it better than you think. You want it to look a certain way. Your way. And for a long time it did, because everyone complied, or nobody pushed back hard enough, or nobody knew the code well enough to push back. And then I moved in and put up a mailbox that isn't on your list, and people looked at it, and you couldn't stand that they looked at it instead of the Henderson's copper finial, or whatever else you'd approved." Brenda's mouth opened. "I heard you," I said, "at the variance meeting. You didn't know I heard you, but I did." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Brenda Kowalski had produced all morning. Her face went through several stages. The stages were denial, calculation, something that might have been shame, and then a kind of rigidity that meant she had found the wall inside herself, where she kept the things she didn't do, and was now standing against it hard. She picked up her clipboard from the mulch. She looked at the lighthouse one more time. "This isn't over," she said. It was meant to be a threat. It came out like a weather report. She walked away down the driveway. The beacon swept past, slow and patient, illuminating the empty space she left behind. From across the street, Frank raised his thermos. From behind the hedgerow, Patty watched Brenda go, then looked at me, then looked at the lighthouse. Then shook her head slowly, with the expression of a third-grade teacher who has given a difficult student the exact outcome their choices produced, and feels about it the way professionals feel. Not triumphant, not sorry, just done. Ray, still against the fence post, moved the toothpick to the other side of his mouth. "Well," he said. "Yeah," I said. "She said tab dividers." "She did," he shook his head. "The tab dividers really got her." "They were good tab dividers," I said. "That was 4 months ago. The lighthouse is still standing. The beacon still turns. Mail still arrives and is deposited into my father's mailbox by the same carrier who told me 6 weeks ago that the lighthouse had become a landmark on his route and he'd started using it to estimate his pace. I can see it from 4 blocks out," he said. "Never late on this street anymore." Brenda filed one more complaint, this one with the State Homeowners Association Regulatory Board, which reviewed the matter and issued a finding that the HOA had no grounds to require removal of a permitted compliant structure and had potentially exceeded its authority in the course of the enforcement actions, a sentence I printed out and put in the folder labeled Documentation next to the permit. The annual amendment vote was never scheduled. You need 52 votes. Nobody called for them. Gerald stopped me at the mailbox 2 weeks ago, my Lighthouse mailbox specifically, and told me that the HOA board meeting minutes from October had included a motion by Brenda to add Lighthouse restrictions to the CC and ours, which had failed too, the one being Brenda. "Patty voted no," he said. "I voted no. Brenda voted yes, and then asked for the vote to be recorded in the minutes as a formal dissent. He paused. I've been on this board for 6 years. She's never asked for a dissent recorded. How'd she seem? I asked. He thought about it. Like someone who still has the clipboard but isn't sure what's on it anymore. I stood there for a moment, looking at the lighthouse in the early evening. The beacon was just becoming visible as the light dropped. The rooster on the mailbox inside was doing what the rooster did, which was stand there and be exactly what it was, which was enough. I went inside. I made dinner, pasta again. I ate it sitting down this time, at the kitchen table, by the window that faces Maple Run Drive, where the lighthouse turned its slow, patient light in the dark. The folder on my shelf had 12 documents in it now. I thought about Frank with his thermos, and Ray with his toothpick, and the paint inspector who'd said nice lighthouse with the quiet appreciation of a man who'd gone looking for a problem and found a structure instead. I thought about my father on a Tuesday afternoon with a pocket knife, carving a rooster into a cedar cap because he thought it would look good. Because there was no committee and no Appendix C and no approved list of things you were allowed to carve. I finished my pasta. Outside, the beacon swept through another slow rotation, crossed the quiet street, touched the front of Frank's house for a quarter second, and moved on. On the shelf by the door, filed between the permit and Doug's unsent letter, there was a printout of the county ordinance for Sycamore Glen. I'd marked a section in yellow. Section 18.4, paragraph 7. Flagpoles. There were no height restrictions. I'd been thinking about a flag,